So today we're going to be looking at some dinnerware that was made at Homer Laughlin for F.W. Woolworth's 5 and dime stores. And we're going to start with Harlequin. Now this shape was developed in the summer of 1936, after it was clear that Fiesta was going to be a success. This was made exclusively for Woolworths, even though there were other smaller companies and wholesale places that sold factory thirds. But for the most part, this was a Woolworth exclusive. The flatware was approved in July of 1936, and it's just the familiar rim shape with the rings that's on the ball or inside the rim. The hollowware was approved on August 28th of 1936, and it's the cone-shaped. Everything was given angular handles. It started off rather modestly. There's only about 16 or 17 pieces in the initial assortment, and there are only 4 glazes. Red, blue, green, and yellow. In this case, we have a Harlequin yellow, which is lighter than Fiesta yellow. A blue, which Huxfords call mauve blue, or I just call it Harlequin blue. I've seen some advertisements call that Delft blue. Green, that Huxfords called spruce green, and then maroon. Frederick Reed, in his notes, always called this color crimson. 2 colors were added soon after to make 6 colors, and that was turquoise and red from Fiesta. And then about 1940-41, it becomes apparent that spruce and maroon are not selling well. And they get replaced by the salmon color, which is actually Fiesta rose. And from here on out, I'm just going to call it rose. I'm not going to call it salmon. And light green, which comes from Fiesta. So your 6 colors are preserved until 1943 when Fiesta Red is discontinued. And then in the 50s, of course, it changes again, just as it does in Fiesta. And you have chartreuse, gray, your rose, you still have a rose, dark green, Harlequin yellow, and turquoise. And then it changes for the final time in 1959 with the 4 colors, medium green, Fiesta Red comes back. You have turquoise, and you still have Harlequin yellow. So that's a little bit about the glazes. There are 12 in all. We'll look at a brochure from its initial release. And this shows, I've got it in plastic because it's falling apart and I don't want to take it out. So I'm hoping that's not going to glare too much. But it shows the original high lip creamer. This creamer didn't pour right, so they enlarged the lip. That still didn't work out right, so then they changed it to this more familiar design. We look at the inside and we just see some table settings, and you can see this is such a basic assortment. We've got plates, platters, bowls, we've got the casserole, cup and saucer, sugar, creamer, and then a double egg cup. Rather unusual in a line to have a double egg cup in its initial assortment, but this was Woolworths, and they liked having double egg cups in their lines. Most of the decalware they offered had a double egg cup that was picked up from the cable shape, and here we see the double egg cup for Harlequin. So not too surprising that this shape should have one. And of course a little single egg cup is added as well. The lines between artware and dinnerware are somewhat blurred, just as we saw in Fiesta. That was video number 11. And the same thing happens to Harlequin. As the years go on, 37, 38, 39, and 40, more pieces are added. The line expands to about, I think it's 45 or 46 pieces at its maximum. And then with World War II, it starts to decrease. And by the time you get to the 50s, you've only got about 30 pieces in the assortment. And we can see, I've got a 50s brochure here we can look at. Well, maybe. Look at the assortment from the 50s. And so this is your Harlequin shape. And when I was talking about Fiesta before, I was talking about the inconsistency of the design with all these different finials and all these different shapes and different handles. But Harlequin is well designed, very consistent with its cone-formed and angular handles and finials. We see the little basket weave ashtray that survived. There were 3 ashtrays. The basket weave ashtrays in this assortment from the 50s. You saw the ashtray saucer, rather unusual piece. And then there's the regular ashtray. So there's a lot of interesting pieces in Harlequin, candle holders, relish tray, and so forth. We look at the back, and it talks about the glazes, And it says yellow, green, which is dark green, chartreuse, turquoise, gray, and there's salmon, which is actually rose. So you can call it salmon, you can call it rose. So that's Harlequin. One thing I do want to talk about before moving on, let's see if we can find it, are the spoon rests, which were developed for Harlequin in the 50s. And I have one here in Harlequin yellow. Look underneath. You can find them in undecorated blanks and with decals. This is the small rose decals from Rhythm Rose. And there's American Provincial. But you can find them in Harlequin glazes. The issue, however, is that the only ones that seem to pop up are Harlequin yellow, turquoise, and dark green. I have a little copy of a memo for pricing on Harlequin, and this is dated 1957. And at the bottom it says spoon holders, 3 spoon, it has a price for them per dozen. So if this is 57 and we're talking about spoon holders or spoon rests, we should be able to find them in chartreuse, gray, and rose. But for some reason we just don't. And I'm just pointing that out in case they ever do pop up. We shouldn't be terribly surprised. This photo was taken by Joe Cunningham at one of the HLCCA conferences and shows the spoon rest. There's a dark green, turquoise, and Harlequin yellow, and an undecorated blank, and oddly enough, medium green and Fiesta red. So these continued into the 59, maybe even 1960. I would consider these very rare, though. Don't expect to find those in any great quantity. But the turquoise and yellow and dark green ones, you really shouldn't have that much problem finding. It's somewhat odd. One final note about Harlequin, it's not marked. You'll never find a marking or a Homer Laughlin marking on Harlequin. That being said, you can find stickers sometimes. There's an F.W. Woolworth sticker, 25 cents for that teacup. Or you might find the so-called export marking, which it says HLC USA. It's believed these were meant to go to Canada. You can find this marking on small pieces of Fiesta and on Riviera in some cases. But this is rather uncommon to find a marking on Harlequin. So any line that was made for Woolworths by Homer Laughlin got a treatment number that was prefixed with a W, and Harlequin's official treatment number is W336. So that's enough about Harlequin for now. The next line made for Woolworths was W337, and that was Kraft Blue. And everything you see on this page, this salesman page, is what was made for Kraft Blue. It was not a very extensive line. In fact, before I show you some pieces, it's rather unusual that this does not have a covered casserole or a gravy boat. This line was introduced in 1937 and was discontinued in 1952, so it was a very long-running line that Woolworths carried. So it's somewhat unusual that we don't see that. I can't think of any other Homer Laughlin line that doesn't have either the casserole or gravy. Maybe Old Roman's the only one. But here's Kraft Blue. It was developed in 1937, and what happened was Woolworths gave Frederick Reed a teacup that was made in Germany that had this same idea of blue clay with a clear or with white handle that was given a clear glaze. And so they wanted a line just like that. And Kraft Blue was born. So this was inspired by a German product, but it's not a direct copy. Reed made his own version with this rope embossing, rather stylized handles as well. So I have a Kraft Blue plate that's broken, and you can see that the clay is actually colored blue, and then it's given a clear glaze. And the handles are just white clay. Kraft Blue is marked with a special Kraft Blue marking. And then the corresponding Kraft Pink, which is pink clay, is marked with a Kraft Pink marking. Now, this wasn't exclusive to Woolworths, but it did start out that way. We have this bittersweet decal on this teapot. This is treatment number GCM 101, which was made for G.C. Murphy's. So it was largely an exclusive, we should say, for Woolworths. But it was made at their request. Again, we're talking about Woolworths, so we got double egg cups with a little rope embossing, Kraft Pink and Kraft Blue. These little novelty creamers, there's a little story with that. Let's move this. When the novelty creamer was made for Harlequin, for Woolworths, they said that they wanted one for their Kraft Blue line. So what they did is they took a Harlequin mold and made one using the Kraft Blue clay and a white handle. And so here's a sample piece. I don't know if you can see those rings, but this is a Kraft Blue version using a Harlequin mold. And once that was approved, then the standard Kraft Blue novelty creamer was made, and a corresponding one in Kraft Pink. So that's a little bit about Kraft Blue and Kraft Pink, 1937 and 1952. Before moving on, I've debated about talking about this, because one thing I don't talk about are prices or, appraising or anything like that. But if you want to collect this, or do collect it now, and you want to get one of these Kraft Pink novelty creamers, you can be patient and spend about $20 or maybe even $30 for one of these. You don't need to spend an inflated price. I've seen them on eBay for as much as $145, with the sellers claiming that these are ultra rare. They're not ultra rare. This is more common, I'll give you that. But these are not so impossible to find that you can wait a little bit and find one at a reasonable price. So that's all I'll say about that. A little Kraft Blue display with advertisement. Of course, we see the assortment. Again, it's so unusual not to see a casserole or a gravy boat with this line. And then there's this tan-bodied wear based on the rope shape. You call it craft shape or rope border shape, whichever you like. And this is called hand-painted peasant wear. I've got more examples on the website, laurahollopark.net, if you want to see it. So it's tan-bodied. The handles and finials are also tan-bodied and given a clear glaze. And you have this hand-painted work. This particular plate has this brown ring on the rim. Ordinarily, you wouldn't see that. That's somewhat unusual. There were 4 subjects: the house that you see here, the sailboat on this teapot, and then there was a windmill and flower pot. This was marked hand-painted Homer Laughlin. I'm not exactly sure if this was for Woolworths. I'd have to look that up. I probably was, considering Kraft Pink and Kraft Blue were. It's a rather difficult line to find. So our last shape we're going to look at is from 1938. And this never really got a formal name. Reed always referred to this as the all-over shape, or the straight-sided shape for all-over pattern for Woolworths. So the flatware comes from Quaker. And the hollowware was special design because this treatment, this chintz-like treatment, covered the entire surface. So they needed something, a nice cylindrical body that could be covered. If you had something with curves on it, it was going to be hard to have the decal not overlap. So a nice cylindrical body would work. So they made a creamer, a sauce boat, a covered sugar, I don't have a lid for this, and a teacup. I can't imagine that this was the cheapest thing in the world to make, because it's such large decals, such bold colors and everything. I bet it was very cost prohibitive. You don't see a lot of this around. If you can find some of this, consider yourself, lucky, because I don't see much of it at all. This all over pattern. Little bits of this pattern can be found on Kitchen Craft, but this is the only time you really see the full version. And all of these pieces are dated 1938, and the ones I find the most are ones that don't have this all over pattern. So I get the impression that they had all this extra hollowware that they were trying to use up. This has a rather nondescript floral decal from 1938. This has gold stamps with no trim from 1938. Sugar, it should have a lid, but I don't have a lid for this one. This treatment was used on Wells, and what else? Virginia Rose. It's another treatment. I'm not thinking what it is right now. Another shape. Let's see. Wells, Virginia Rose, and Brittany. Do some Brittany. And this comes from 38 as well. So that's your straight-sided all-over shape. But all of these were made at the request of Woolworths. And we look at Harlequin again before moving on. It's strange to look at Harlequin, and if this was made by another pottery, as a Fiesta collector, I might say, well, they were just trying to copy Fiesta. But because it's Homer Laughlin and there's a lot of crossover with the glazes and everything, we're willing to embrace it. But it's interesting, this practice, this repeating, we see it so many times, and Harlequin is a perfect example of repeating a practice or competing with oneself with Fiesta. You don't see this with other potteries. So I think that's going to be it for today. Again, Harlequin from 1936, Kraft Blue from 1937, and the rare all-over shape from 1938. That's it for today.